Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining me for part 2 of this Energizer, the Expert. In part 1, we learned all about why connection before content is so critical. We talked about the reason for this specific Energizer to connect it back to our content from the driven to reach model. And we talked about the prep and planning that went in place to design the slides and to get the audience ready to take on the task of completing this activity. We saw the first piece. We saw the live facilitation of the Energizer, introducing it, giving the instructions, and then trying it out for the first time. And right away, we can see in part 1 that the audience does not fully get the instructions. Thankfully, one person in the audience does ask to clarify who should be participating and at what point. However, there's definitely an opportunity here to clarify and improve these instructions so that the group will get it the first time. The other thing I'm thinking about as I look back, rewatch, and reflect is that maybe I can do a better job as the facilitator to prep and plan ahead of time with some plants, some participants who I've worked with before or who are a part of the inner circle for the presenter, who will be present and who will be willing to demonstrate. So had I pulled 2 people aside and said, hey, I'm going to have you participate first, and here's what you're going to do, I probably would have had them be audience members rather than being the speakers in that moment. Let me rephrase that. I probably would have them be the press under these circumstances rather than being the experts, because that was where the audience struggled. Who are the press? What do they do? What should they ask? And you can see that even throughout the next examples of that Energizer. So that's what I think I would have done in hindsight in terms of really making the most out of this 10 minutes that I had. Let me even get more granular on some of the things I noticed looking back on the recording that I would like to see myself enhance for the next iteration. I've watched the playback of this Energizer recording so many times, and I do that on purpose, very intentionally and very objectively, to be able to identify areas to improve. I can see where am I using great eye contact and where am I not. I can see how my slides come from the audience perspective versus from what I'm seeing from the facilitator perspective. I can see things that the audience was doing, maybe their actions or their facial expressions, that I wasn't noticing during the live facilitation because I was aware of all these details to keep that conversation moving. So I'm highly encouraging you, if you're doing some work where you're recorded or could be recorded, do it. I know people are uncomfortable watching themselves and listening to themselves. And listen, it's going to keep being uncomfortable until it's not, until you do it a lot. Or maybe it's always uncomfortable. But there's so much value in being able to watch yourself and identify some objective areas for improvement if you're spending a lot of time facilitating or a lot of time presenting, especially virtually. Really, it's such a blessing to have that recording and have that feedback. As I was watching the playback right now while I'm editing, I identified 4 different areas of improvement that I want to make sure I put into place before my next opportunity to facilitate this Energizer. Let me share those with you based on what you may have seen in part 1, the planning and preparation of this Energizer. The first thing is that I started to realize early on that the orange colored font on top of the gray background was not the strongest contrast. Someone who was challenged in a way by their eyesight or maybe looking at a small screen like their phone probably would not have been able to very clearly read some of that text on screen. So you can see this comparison between what it looks like for the text to be not bold versus bold. The boldness does help a little bit with clarity, but I think I need to rethink the entire color scheme that I'm using because I don't want the basic visual to be inaccessible. Then someone's going to miss out on the entire activity. That's the first note. Actually, Now that I'm looking back at my notes, those are the first two notes because I saw number one, the orange is difficult to see, and then that it's better to see if it's bold. You do need to spend some time planning what will your expert level topics be. And you don't really want to go with the ones that are just run of a mill typical jobs that you would expect people to have and be able to speak to. It almost feels like a new layer of pressure that you now have to become an expert or assume this role as an expert in something people would expect you to already know, right? So you want them to be outlandish. You want them to be really unlikely someone could pull those details just right out off the cuff. And that does take some planning and some prep. So while I was hand sketching those slides, I was also taking notes on potential fields or opportunities that we could put up here as the expert for people to speak to. Then taking the time to design just a really clean slide in Canva to make sure that it stays fun and light and really pops on screen. And then the fourth thing, you see in part one that the time was clearly not effective. In the book from Karen Tilstra, the expert is supposed to be speaking for 2 minutes. I cut it down to 45 seconds so that we could really make the most out of doing several iterations of this activity in the live session, filling up the 10 minutes, but not exceeding. Very important. Do not go over your partner's time limit for you. I realized early on, the audience realized early on that 45 seconds went really, really quickly. I increased it to 1 minute, and I only did that adjustment on the fly without extending it too much longer because I didn't have that moment to think, okay, if I add another 30 seconds each, how many times will we be able to facilitate? You know, I just kept it simple. I pushed it up to 1 minute. Thankfully, I was able to use that Canva timer to track so the audience could see the time as well. And I probably, in doing this again, would ask for more like 15 minutes if it were possible, or 12 minutes, so that I could extend the time some and still allow for a few different groups to come up and participate. Okay, now that we've seen a little bit about what we can enhance for future versions of this Energizer, let's watch the second and third live activity to see how did the group do, did they pick up what was being asked of them, and what was the outcome in terms of getting different people in the meeting to be participating.
Okay, and I'm going to have Nuri and Wendy speak on this topic of harvesting seaweed. Harvesting seaweed. You all are the experts in harvesting seaweed. I saw the look on your face of excitement because of how much you know about this topic. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, Wendy, what's your favorite type of seaweed to harvest?
The most healthiest kind, all of them.
Okay. Nuri, what is the tool that you think is most effective for pulling the seaweed out of the sea?
Well, because we specialize in curly, fresh seaweed, we like using thongs that look like detanglers. That's, if you think about it, like when you're detangling your hair, we use those thongs, and those are very helpful in making sure that when we lift the seaweed, we're able to cut it and keep it intact.
Wendy, what happens once you pull the seaweed out of the sea? Where does it go?
The seed goes into a basket, and at that point is separated from the most abundant seeds from the ones that don't actually bring the true nourishments to the people.
I love that. Let's give a round of applause to our harvesting seaweed experts.
Wendy!
Great work, great work. Okay, so now I'm gonna have Linnea go, and I'm actually gonna ask Erica to go again because I can't get enough of hearing her speak during this meeting. So we're gonna go one more round. And this one is, let's see. Here's a great one. A playground designer. A playground designer. So you get the opportunity to design the most creative playgrounds. People have never even seen some of these pieces of equipment. So let's hear some more from our experts.
Erica, I want to know, how did you come up with that floating disc, and how are you making sure that it is safe for kids to play?
I'm glad you asked that question. We are actually partnering with the National Science for Safe Playgrounds and also with Future Innovation Exchange on how can we be innovative with playgrounds. And this is what we came up with. It's polyfiber and very soft material, all natural. So the children can play, but they can also be immersed in a futuristic environment.
Wow, Linnea, how did you choose the colors for the playground?
We chose the most vibrant colors, and we did a survey with a couple of kids, about 20 of them, and they mostly like orange, blue, green, the colors that you see, the yellow. So we really got our information from some kids.
I love it. You always have to keep your customer in mind. Okay, round of applause for our playground designer expert. Erica got into the materials used. I'm so impressed by that. Pulling that off the cuff.
After watching this playback a few different times, both the part 1 and the part 2, I want to take a moment to really celebrate. When we're looking at lessons learned, it's so easy to skip over what went well, but it's critical to stop and look at that and really understand what is effective, because you want to then take that and package it and keep using it. Keep adding the celebrations in. Keep speaking clearly. Keep using people's names when you're addressing them. Those are all best practices that you should be taking and applying to other energizers, other speaking opportunities, or other communication opportunities overall. Really, when you hone those skills and you bring them into every conversation where you are, whether it's formal or informal, and you speak with confidence, you are building trust with those around you that will help you in so many different scenarios, one of which is increasing the feeling of belonging and psychological safety in your group. So important. So the things that I want to celebrate, I thought it was really important that after each group participated, I was encouraging the audience to give a celebration or to clap hands, because you don't want to miss out on the people that really stretched themselves and went out of their comfort zone to do this activity that you asked them to do. That's very important. The other piece that I want to recognize is that by the third attempt of doing this activity, some of the audience started to understand that they were being asked to ask questions to the experts. It took a little bit more time than I expected, which means I need to go back and rethink how to explain my instructions or how to give a more practical example, as I said in the beginning of this video. But I actually think it's a great sign. With just a little bit of a tweak, we will be able to get our audience on board with this activity sooner so that they can then do the actions that we're asking and we can have a really robust activity. So I don't know, watching this back, I feel really hopeful that the next time around we can get the participation up a little sooner and keep that energy high throughout the last couple minutes of this activity. I do want to bring up one more design or formatting oriented note here, which is when that playground designer slide comes on screen, some of the text is actually off of screen, and so it just doesn't look as crisp as I would want, or maybe as you would want if you were putting this material out there in the world. So I need to definitely go back to the drawing board in terms of some of my slide design and make sure that the text, the pictures, everything critical is a little bit more central in the slide and not going to get cut off when it comes to presenting. Before we wrap up this video, let's look at the last couple minutes of this activity where we're going to put a why to what we're doing. We're going to connect it back to the content and make sure there's this really clear purpose for why we're doing what we're doing, and then passing it over to the presenter. Let's take a look.
All right, I know that this feels a little bit uncomfortable or silly sometimes, but at the end of the day, confidence is a skill that can be practiced. So sometimes we actually hold our opinions and our feedback back because we think, I don't know enough about this. I don't know as much about this as the next person. But when it comes to reaching your own goals, confidence, even if you don't know everything yet, can be practiced, can be grown, and you can apply those skills to your life to see improvement day by day. So thanks so much for participating. I'm going to bring up Nuri now to introduce Erica Martin.
Confidence is a skill that can be practiced and grown. So true. So relevant when we're about to talk about this REACH model to help you achieve your personal or professional goals. You really have to have the confidence behind you. Anyone who doesn't see your vision, anyone who's inconvenienced by the changes you're about to make, your own self who's inconvenienced because it is so challenging to change habits and to insert new things into our day-to-day, we need that confidence. So using an energizer like this to tie those pieces of the message together really resonated. And even though it took 3 rounds for our audience to start catching on to what we were asking them to do, I feel so inspired that this group got it and that I can improve the instructions earlier on to get them engaged even sooner. Now, if I had to make a recommendation for you, I would say that the expert is a better activity for an intact group, a group who already at least a little bit knows each other. I also could see this activity being one that would help when the job responsibilities involve something to do with spontaneous speaking. Meaning, let's say that part of your job responsibilities are completing presentations for bid work. Maybe you need to get contracts, and you will be asked on the spot questions that you'll have to respond to in front of a panel of judges. Practicing spontaneous speaking in this way through the expert consistently, that would really help build up that skill of being able to spontaneously speak and answer questions on the fly. I might also say that that would be a skill you would want to practice if you're a higher level leader, because having clear, understandable, easy to relate to speaking and facilitation skills is critical for inspiring trust as a leader. People want to hear that you confidently know what you're talking about and you can convey that message to them clearly. So those are the 2 things that I see here in terms of using the expert that you could apply back to your workplace. And I would expect those 2 scenarios to really, really bolster the feeling of belongingness for the whole group, because now we're engaged in activity that has a direct correlation to daily skills that we need on the job. Or now I'm feeling more confident that my leader or someone in my team is taking the extra time to make sure that we are all connecting before we jump right into the next set of tasks. However, I am now so energized to try this again, to make these changes and to get it back in front of a public-facing audience, because even though it's not perfectly suited for that, the way that the audience responded this first time gave me a lot of hope that we can get this to a place where it will be easy to grab, understand, and participate earlier on. One thing I haven't shared yet is an intention of mine to prep and provide a list of general questions to the folks who are serving as the press, to our audience. It's a lot of pressure to come up with some general question on the fly that you think someone will be able to answer clearly and that will apply to any topic that comes up. Definitely not easy. So I'm going to take responsibility for that as the facilitator, figure out the best way, whether I put that on screen, post it in the chat, share an attachment. We'll see how the best way would work. Maybe I'll have a chance to practice it ahead of time. But by providing that list of question opportunities to the press, to the audience, I would expect the engagement to go up just a little bit more. So please keep an eye out for future content. I will be facilitating the expert again in June, if not before, and I will be posting additional content about how this is helping to instill belongingness for you, for your team, for a group project that you're working on. Just a fun way to connect the dots of why are we doing this, making it important that we connect first, and then really digging into the content at hand.